man. Well, whether that made you excited, nervous, or maybe a little bit nauseous, I personally am so grateful that you're here with us this morning or tuning in online. My name is Jordan, and I have the great privilege of being the student ministry director here at North Point. And we have been looking forward to this conversation for several months now, because over the next several weeks, we're going to be talking about the area of our life that perhaps takes up more of our life or more of our thought life than really any area of our life, whether that's for good reasons or for bad. And it's an incredibly important conversation to have as well, because we really do live in a unique time and a unique culture when it comes to navigating communication and relationships. I mean, honestly, we don't think about it this way because it's just kind of our normal, but we live in a historic time period. Like the year 2007 is going to go down as one of the most significant years since about 1440, 600 years ago, when the printing press was introduced and it launched the Renaissance and Enlightenment. I mean, 2007 was when social media took off and Facebook and Twitter, and when the smartphone was introduced with the iPhone, and our culture and our relationships and our communication methods have been evolving ever since. If you think about it, there's some really great things about it, but also some very confusing and complicated parts about it. And one of the ways that things have changed a lot is in 2017, 40% of new relationships started online or through social media. That number 2 decades ago, in 1995, was 2%. That's changed a lot very quickly. That number before 1960 is believed to be no human ever, right? That's a big change. In fact, in 1960, there was the IBM 650, which was a computer that took up the size of an entire room, and there were 49 people that were matched based on some common personality traits, and that's considered to be the origin of online dating, right? So not only has the way that we've met changed a little bit, but now the stages of relationships are very confusing as well. There's way more gray, there's way more stages than there has ever been. 70% of singles don't know when they're going on a first date. Like, they're just not sure. Are we hanging out? Is this a date? What is this? This may be the first time in human history that two people cannot know if they're dating and not really care to define it. It's new. If you're in your 20s, then talking is probably a stage you've been familiar with for a while now, right? That's not new to you. If you are the parent of a teenager, that might be a little bit confusing to you, that there's this new pre-dating stage called talking, right? Like you and I, we're talking right now, but we're not talking. You know, like we're talking. And so I was talking to I was communicating with one of our seniors this week, and I was asking them, like, is there a new stage that I'm not aware of, before talking? And they were like, well, there's kind of like social media talking first. The way it starts now is you DM first or you snap first, and you don't ever speak about it or acknowledge it in person, but you kind of know it's a thing where you're not really friends and there's something else there, but then talking is after that. I'm like, okay, yeah, it makes total sense. So social media talking is talking with no commitment. Talking is dating without the commitment. Dating is kind of honestly now like marriage without the commitment. I mean, there's tons of gray and confusion. But then it doesn't stop there. If you are in a long-term relationship, if you're in a dating relationship, or if you are married, there's all kinds of new layers and boundaries and things to think about now. It hasn't been that long since you could stay in touch with your significant other throughout the workday, and you could text them all day long, or Facebook message them all day long, or that you could get in trouble for not calling on the way home. That is fairly new. It hasn't been that long since you could sit with somebody and both be on your device and not interact with each other for extended periods of time. It hasn't been that long since binge-watching Netflix has been considered quality time together, right? I mean, a lot of this is new to us, and it's changing, and it's evolving quick. Something else that adds to the complexity and the confusion is what else is out there on the internet, right? Because what else is out there is 30-second, 2-minute, 5-minute motivational YouTube clips telling me how to change my life and my relationships. There's these 2-step, 5-step, 10-step blogs written by somebody in 30 minutes about, how I'm supposed to model all my life and relationships. We've never had so many opinions, so many inputs that honestly just kind of say and justify whatever you want and however you feel. We've never had such unprecedented access to compare where our marriage is at compared to Kim and Kanye's marriage, right? We've never had so much access just to our neighbor's relationship, to our best friend's relationship. There's never been so many opportunities to compare. How happy should my family look? How much should my spouse make? How fit should they be? There's all of these new opportunities. There's more opportunities than there's ever been to communicate with people perhaps we shouldn't be communicating with. There is so much new complexity. And to clarify, We are not against any of those things. We're not against progress. We're not against change. We're not against social media. We're not against Netflix. But we are for something, and I hope you feel that over the course of this series, because what we are for is healthy relationships, whatever that means for you currently. We are for healthy singleness. We are for healthy dating. We are for a healthy first year, 10th year, 20th year, and beyond of marriage. We're for a healthy second marriage. We're for a healthy breakup. We're for healthy heartbreak. The moment that the bomb has gone off, we're for that moment as well. And I hope that what you find over the course of this series is hope. And not just hope, but a way forward. If you kind of like the way things are right now, I hope that you realize that 10 years from now, there's a richer relationship than you ever dreamed possible that's available to you. If you feel kind of stuck or stagnant or going through the motions, I hope that you find hope to get unstuck. And if you are in one of the scariest, most fearful, most angry moments of your life, if you're in the midst of a ton of turmoil and confusion, I hope you know that doesn't have to be your forever reality, and there is a way forward. But the way that I want to start our time today is really very simple. Part one is going to be the simplest part of this series. It's just laying a foundation. It's not going to be something that you haven't heard of before, but I think it's something that we should all consider before we can have future conversations in this series. And what I want to do is I want to talk about a disconnect between how we approach our relationships and how we approach just about every other area of our life of significance, okay? And this disconnect that I want to talk about, to kind of unpack it, I want to talk about two different myths that we commonly buy into. One of those myths that builds up to this big disconnect is the experience myth. It's the idea that the more experience I have, the more I can kind of trust myself, the more I can just follow my heart, and the more I'd really just have it all figured out. Like the more people I date, the better. Maybe it's the more sex, the better. Maybe it's the longer I've been married, I kind of have to stop listening to people because I've been there, done that, and I know what I'm doing. But the reality is it's a myth, because experience does not make you wiser. It doesn't. You know that. You know that because maybe you have parents that are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, and they've been making the same mistakes for decades. Perhaps you've been making some of the same mistakes for decades. And I'm not just talking about in your relationships. I'm talking about little things. Procrastination doesn't help. And yet, here it is again and again and again. You can't eat just one. You can't watch just one show. I mean, you've been there before, but it doesn't help us. Experience doesn't make us wiser. Evaluated experience makes you wiser. And I would like to suggest, myself included, that we have less of it than we think, specifically in the area of relationships, because we tend to evaluate the wrong side of the relationship. Perhaps we haven't, come to the realization yet that of all of our breakups and all of our dating relationships, we are the common denominator in all of those when something went wrong. If you've been married for a while, it's a very normal defense mechanism to identify, because you know your partner so well now, to identify their weaknesses and to just attack those so you don't have to think about your own. And as a result, we can be in relationships for a long time without any real evaluated experience. Unlike any other area of life, when you think about your profession, you have to have evaluated experience or you're not going to make it very far. But the requirements to be in a relationship are not long. In fact, here's pretty much the whole list. You need a pulse, and that's about it. Maybe you could argue some hormones. You have a pulse, some hormones, you can start a relationship. Hey, I think you're attractive. There's days where I kind of wonder, maybe I think I'm attractive, so let's just try this, and, will you go out, that kind of stuff. And if two people are breathing, they can begin a relationship, and so often we don't have guidance, and we don't have steps, and we don't think about where we're headed or where we're going, which leads us to our next myth that kind of builds this big disconnect. And the next myth is the promise myth. It's the idea that, I think I have experience, and so as a result, I'm convinced, if you're not married, the promise myth for you is I'm convinced one day I'm going to promise myself to somebody else, we're going to make some promises before some friends and family, we're going to throw a big party, and then everything will be different. All of my past, hurts and wounds and insecurities and selfishness and all our drama and conflict, well, we're just going to love each other so much, we're going to promise, and then everything will be all right. Or if you're married, the promise myth looks like this. It looks like, hey, we've been here before, so I promise now I know it's going to be different. And I'm just going to kind of white knuckle it, but I'm not going to change my approach. I'm not going to change my thinking. I'm not going to ask anybody for help. I'm not going to take any advice or let anybody in. It's just going to be different, I promise. And then we make the same promises again, 5 times, 10 times, 100 times over. See, this is where the disconnect lies. We don't approach any other significant area of our life this way. What if you were about to get a significant surgery done, And you go into the prep, and they're, telling you what's going to happen. And you're like, doctor, tell me what the goal of this is. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to be real with you. I'm just going to cut you open, and then I'm just going to follow my heart. I don't really know what I'm going to take out, but I'll know it when I see it. When I look in there, I'm just going to pick and prod, and we'll get there. My buddies, they told me I got this. I watched a little bit of Grey's Anatomy, and it's going to be all right. You would run, right? You would run. Or if this guy was going to represent you, you might run without me saying anything. I don't know. But, if this guy was going to represent you and he was like, hey, I've seen some Law and Order and I've got a big heart. Like, I'm for you. I also heard this profession makes a lot of money, so I'm just going to do my best. Well, have you gone to school? No. Have you ever represented anybody else? No. But I promise, I've got this. You wouldn't let it happen. If your coach of your favorite team said, I have a revolutionary method, we're going to not practice this year. We're going to get everybody, though, in the locker room before every game, and we're going to look each other in the eye, and we're going to promise with tears in our eyes that we're going to win tonight. That's my new strategy. I can tell you from experience this does not work because I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and the Cleveland Browns have been doing this for 25 years. It does not work. And you know that this does not work, but as a result, we tend to enter into new stages of our relationships with no real preparation. We think we have experience and we think we're prepared, but really we haven't done the work to prepare. And this is something that can get us at any stage of a relationship. Even if you've been married a long time, maybe you've been married 10 years, but you've never been married 20 before. You've had kids for a while, but you've never had teenagers. You've been an empty nester before. You never retired together before. There is always a future stage ahead of us for us to prepare for. And so that leads me to this very, very profound, mind-boggling, hard to focus in on statement that if you aren't preparing, you won't be prepared, right? That's the disconnect. We know this in so many other areas of our life that we have to prepare, but when it comes to relationships, so often we don't. This is not rocket science. This is going to be, like I said, the simplest message of the whole series. I would argue that perhaps this message is going to be simpler, that maybe the way forward is simpler than you thought or imagined, and at the exact same time, more demanding than what you might have expected. And so specifically to talk about the way forward, to talk about what it looks like to prepare, I want to look at what Paul writes in the letter to the Galatians in Galatians chapter 6. But before I do that, before we look at it, I just want to pause and talk about why would we do that? We have the opportunity right now to look at anything in the world, to look at, anybody from history in the world. Why should we? Why does it even make sense to look at the pages of the New Testament for direction? And I think, we have two different camps in the room. If you came in the room today and you would already say, like, coming into these doors, I was already a Christian. Like, before, I have to do any kind of defense of the Bible or argument for or anything like that, you would just say, I already believe it's trustworthy. I already believe it's true. Have you ever thought about what an incredible gift that is? There is so much noise. There are so many inputs. There are so many opinions in the world, but we have something that we can look to that we will not regret following 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. That is amazing. We should desire to know everything in it that has to say about this incredibly important area of our life. It's an amazing gift. But if you came in here today and maybe you got invited by your boyfriend or girlfriend who knew we were doing this series, and you're honestly just kind of sitting there hoping we don't bring up anything too uncomfortable, anything too awkward, and you're just kind of trying to get through it. I totally get that. I love that you're here. Maybe you're like, I have all kinds of questions about the Bible. I have all kinds of pushbacks, and I get that as well. I do think for you, this is still a valuable exercise to consider because we are talking about ancient wisdom that has been around for thousands of years. And where we have, these blogs that, again, written in 30 minutes, and who knows how much experience this person has and what are their credentials and all that. We have literature that across generations, every continent on the planet, kingdoms have come and gone, and this still stands, and people from cultures all over the world, all ethnicities, all backgrounds, all income levels have said, this has been helpful to me, and it's provided freedom and a way forward that I never dreamed of. I think we should at least be curious about what these people are saying is so helpful to them. So I think wherever you fall, it's valuable. And here is what Paul says in Galatians 6. He writes, a man reaps what he sows. And maybe you're new to church and you've heard this before, you just didn't know that's where it came from. Maybe you've grown up in church and this was used in a more kind of condescending way. You got in trouble with your mom growing up and she was like, well, you reap what you sow. But I don't think this has to be inherently negative or positive. I think it's just a truth statement. It just is what it is. It's just true. And I think you wouldn't just say, I'm being illogical or naive. You would actually say, I'm being straight up crazy. If I were to say, I want to plant potatoes, but I'm expecting flowers, okay? I'm going to plant potatoes, but I'm expecting flowers because my friends, they told me that's what I deserve. And I actually had a couple friends that said if I plant potatoes, I'm not going to get flowers, but I kicked them out of my life, and now I have friends that tell me what I want to hear, right? And I started praying for flowers. So I did plant potatoes, but I've been praying for a long time for flowers. My heart tells me I deserve them. And then I got a potato. So clearly God's not real, obviously, because what kind of God would allow potatoes to grow? And you see what I'm saying? It's a complete disconnect, and we already know the fact that this is true. What Paul is saying is that what you plant, what you prepare, is what you'll receive. It's what you'll harvest, and it's just a truth statement. But it's not just net neutral either. If we are not sowing and preparing for our future hopes and dreams, we are actually actively working against them. Because here's the two ways that we can sow. Paul explains it for us, because the next verse, he says, whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. The result will be destruction. That's what you're going to get back. And what the audience knew reading this already is they would have read this straight through, so they would have known about 8-9 sentences earlier, Paul had already explained what the acts of the flesh are. So they knew exactly what he was talking about. Because a few sentences earlier, he had said the acts of the flesh are obvious. I don't even need to explain them. They're those inner impulses, those inner desires, almost like an animalistic part of us that just wants to feel good, that just wants to do whatever we want in the moment, and not worry about the consequence and not worry about what anybody else says, a very kind of selfish motive and desire, a quick fix. You know what they are. I don't even need to give you a list, but I'm going to give you kind of a weird list anyways, and that's what he does. And he says, sexual immorality, impurity, and lustful pleasures are on this list. He says, hey, look, this is not God trying to shame you. This is just true. This is just what is. And he cares for you, so he's trying to give you a heads up. And he's saying, look, if you take something intimate and something sacred, and you use it outside of its context for something it wasn't designed for the pursuit of a feeling, it's going to reap destruction. If I drive a Ferrari off the Grand Canyon and expect it to fly like a plane, that's on me. The Ferrari is an incredible piece of technology. There's nothing wrong with it. I just used it for something it wasn't designed for. And so what Paul is saying is, hey, if you reap that, if you sow that, it's going to reap destruction. And some of you have seen this. You already know this. This has sown destruction in your own life, in the life of somebody that you care about. You've seen it ruin a friendship. You've seen it ruin a dating relationship. You've seen it ruin a marriage. You've seen it ruin hopes and dreams, and you've seen it reap destruction. And Paul says there's more on the list. He says idolatry and sorcery, which are two words I know are part of our common language, right? But what he's speaking to is he's saying, hey, when I take God off of first place and I decide to make my own God, ultimately so that I can control my own God or make me my own God, there's going to be destruction that results because only God knows and has what is best for us. He says, hey, hostility, quarreling, and jealousy are acts of the flesh. He's saying, hey, if you kind of get attention from your significant other, from your dating relationships, by kind of stirring things up, you're trying to get a reaction from them so that they notice you, and that's kind of the way that you've learned to relate with one another. He's saying that's an act of the flesh. I'm not talking about a candid, loving honesty with your partner. I'm talking about you're picking fights to get under their nerves. He's saying that's acts of the flesh. Or jealousy to say, I'm not comfortable for the spotlight just shining on them for the night. I'm threatened by the fact that he or she is more successful than I am. Acts of the flesh, it will result in destruction. He continues, and he says, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, and envy. I do think selfish ambition kind of just summarizes this whole section, like that kind of one phrase. I also think it's interesting that he says outbursts of anger. If the way you kind of get control in relationship is by powering up, is by higher volume, is by demanding, is by force, is by aggression. He's saying that is an act of the flesh that will result in relational destruction. And then he finishes the list and he says, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like these. And we all cancel our Super Bowl plans for the night, you know? But he says, if you are going to put yourself in a position where you're not in the right state of mind and you might make decisions that harm yourself and harm people that you care about, you're just living for the moment, you're living for a fleeting feeling, and that's as good as it gets. Those are acts of the flesh, and as long as we are sowing those things, how can we expect anything else but destruction in our lives? But then, if this represents the acts of the flesh, he gives us another option as well. And he tells us what that is. He says, or you could sow this. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Now, if you're on that side where we're just kind of looking at this as ancient literature today that has been time-tested, this is a little bit harder to put in context, right? I think the best we could maybe get is thinking, if I'm going to sow according to a higher standard, or I'm going to sow according to the long-term game, or to something bigger than me, that might get in the right direction, but that would be taking what Paul is saying out of context. What he really is saying is sowing according to what your heavenly Father has for you, because your heavenly Father is crazy about you. He is a good Father. And if you're a parent, you get this. You know that your kids are going to mess up. You know that they're not going to be perfect, but you don't want them to unnecessarily hurt themselves or hurt important people in their lives. And God doesn't want that for us either. He wants what is best for us, and he shows us that path forward. And when we sow according to that, when we walk in step with him, when we spend time with him, we reap the fruit of the Spirit. And the fruit of the Spirit is love. What a different start to the list. There are 4 different types of love throughout the Bible. There's a brotherly love, kind of a friendship and family love. There's a romantic love. But then there's agape love, which is what this is. It's God love. It is an unconditional, all-encompassing, not devoid of emotion. Emotion is a part of it, but it's so much bigger than that. It is an act of the will. It is active. It is like a verb. It is forward. It is unconditional, and this is the type of love that we develop for others when we walk in step with the Spirit, when we grow in our relationship with our Heavenly Father. Joy. Similarly, unconditional. It goes beyond a happiness. It's not about a fleeting moment. It's so much better than butterflies. It is an unconditional, not dependent upon, actually, which is really important, not dependent upon your significant other. This is a difference than a codependence type thing where you can be joyful despite the mood of the person on the other side of you. It goes beyond circumstances. He continues and he says, peace, forbearance, or patience, and kindness. Maybe you're like, gosh, I don't want the Hollywood romance. I don't care about how many people think we're cute on Instagram. I just want to sit next to somebody that knows me and I know them and feel peace and not anxiety and not stress and not worry and not fear, not anger. I just want peace. Patience. Patience goes at the speed of the person on the other side of you. Love is usually slower than we want it to be. Patience is saying, I'm not going to control, I'm not going to manipulate, I'm not going to force or pressure. And kindness. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is power under control. Kindness is I'm going to lend my strength to you without reminding you of your weakness. He continues, and he finishes it by saying goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I love the fact that love and self-control bookend these, because it's almost like when we focus on those two and get those two right, everything else kind of comes together in between. And he says, if this is what you're preparing, if this is what you're sowing and planting, then let us not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Another translation says a harvest of blessing, meaning a harvest of happiness, a harvest of significance. He acknowledges you may become weary. In other words, it is difficult, it is trying, and we'll talk more next week about how we make this a practical reality in our lives because of how difficult it is. But he says, hey, if you don't give up, and when you're sowing love, joy, and peace, and patience, and kindness, and goodness, and faithfulness, and gentleness, and self-control, as you continue to show up again, and apologize first again, and seek to forgive again, and you're intentional again, and creative again, and empathetic again, as you keep sowing, yes, that's going to be tiring, but the end result is so much better than what you would be reaping otherwise. It's significant. Part of the reason that he says that this is difficult is even just how he contrasts the two, right? I like that he doesn't use the same word for both. He doesn't call them the acts of the flesh and the acts of the Spirit, or the fruit of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. He calls them acts because they're quick. They're quick fixes. It's instant gratification. It's now at the expense of later. And I'm just not going to think about one day. I'm going to think about what feels good now. But fruit, Well, fruit's more of a lasting investment. Fruit is long-term. Fruit takes time, fruit takes care, fruit takes nourishment to grow, and there are seasons where fruit does not grow. And you're going to be like, it feels like nothing is actually happening. And he's like, yes, those are the weary stages, but then there's going to be the moments where you're like, oh my gosh, it was all worth it. Look at how he closes the section. He says, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. Not just people we think we can get something out of for our benefit, but this is a fruit thing. This is a who we are thing, who we're becoming, especially those who belong to the family of believers. So, what are our opportunities? What are our opportunities to sow something different, to sow where we want to go and what we dream of one day? I think it's just interesting to focus in on our relationships, to think about what are you sowing into your future today? If you're single right now, what are you sowing into your future? Did you know you're writing the story today that you are one day going to share with the most important people in your life? Do you realize what a gift this stage is to say, I am going to be self-evaluative. I am going to focus on the fruit. I'm going to focus on becoming the person that the person I'm looking for is looking for. Do you realize what an incredible opportunity? That's beneficial if you desire to be single your whole life, or if you desire to be in a relationship someday. That is beneficial and you won't regret it. Or will you say, you know what, no regrets, I'm going to live it up. Yes, wild parties, that's me. As many experiences as I can get. I know I'm building some skeletons in the closet. I know I'm building some memories that are going to stick with me. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to think about then. I'm just going to kind of hope that as I do this, I don't know, magically that's going to result. We would say, gosh, I'm being a crazy person. If your singleness has looked more like this than like this, I would say maybe this is a time, and a very practical thing would be to pause and say, you know what, for 3 months, for 6 months, for a whole calendar year, I'm just not going to engage in any kind of romantic relationships. I'm going to focus and sow what I know I need to sow to become who I know that I need to be, and I'm not going to focus on this. And you know, whether it's a dating relationship or it's, you know, hookup culture or whatever it might be, I'm not going to do that for a time period. I have a friend who actually did this, and she said it was one of the greatest years of her life, one of just the most rewarding years, very difficult. But she said, I just think I'm going to be grateful the next 50 years that I took 1 year doing this, because I was in a place I couldn't walk in a room without wondering what guys were thinking of me and who was available, and I was settling for guys I know I never should have, but my identity was wrapped up in that, and I was so scared of being alone. It was so worth it. And if you do that, I promise you, about 2 weeks in, you're going to meet Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I want to throw it all away. But that could be a very practical step for you. If you like the way that singleness is going, maybe you just need to be encouraged today to say, hey, stick with it. It really is worth it because a reward is coming. If you're in a dating relationship, what are you sowing into your relationship today? Are you sowing empathy? Are you sowing communication? Are you sowing commitment? Are you sowing integrity and respect? Are you not making, a hypocrite of yourself where you're like, you know what, I'm going to treat people the way I want people to treat my brother or treat my sister. I'm going to build that kind of a story. Or would you say, you know what, honestly, relationships for me, as soon as I'm not happy, I'm out. I mean, they're really for my benefit. They're really for my happiness. They're really for me feeling good. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to think about what I'm building later. I'm just going to use relationships for me and for my benefit. What are you sowing in your relationships? Or what are you sowing into your marriage? Would you say that you are as intentional or anywhere close to as intentional as you were when you had to win her over? Would you say there's still that kind of same level of creativity and drive? Would you say, gosh, I'm intentional about discovering my wife, discovering my children? Or would you say, you know what? I'm willing to stay late at work. I'm willing to work on the weekends. I'm willing to get another degree for my career. And I know some of that comes from a good place. I get it. I got to put food on the table. I got to pay the bills. I understand all that. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of preparation I'm willing to put in for my career. But I really can't remember the last time I put 30 minutes into planning my anniversary, much less a date night with my significant other. Are you sowing, gosh, I'm letting people in on the other side of me. I'm letting a couple have eyes and ears to what it's really like behind closed doors for us, and I'm listening to them. Or I'm going to somebody who has more evaluated experience than I do. Maybe on the other side of a counselor or a couple that's a couple stages ahead of you, and I'm listening to them and preparing for where it is that we're heading. Or would you say, you know what, we've been doing this for a while. Nobody else really knows my relationship. My relationship is unique. If you knew him, if you knew her, it's fine, and we're just going to kind of keep coasting? Are you learning in the same way? Are you discovering in the same way? For Emily and I, we've been in a relationship a little bit over 10 years now, and we just actually last week, we celebrated our 4-year wedding anniversary, and I don't know when the point crosses from you feel like you don't know anything to you feel like you're allowed to know something. I just still feel like I don't know anything, and so I prefer to, use Paul as the bad guy and just go to, his words to kind of like cut in a little bit. But for Emily and I, there was a realization about 5 years into our relationship for me that I was consistently sowing way more of this. I think for a lot of us, it's probably a little bit of both. But for me, I was sowing so many of these things that was really based on my pride, my selfish desires, the way I wanted to be perceived, the way I wanted the relationship to go. And honestly, it was specifically around like anything that she would bring up that I didn't want to hear on the other side of me. I was so incredibly defensive. So much pride involved in that. I would shut her down. I would get angry. I would flip it back on her and make her feel guilty for even bringing it up. And I kept building a culture in our environment where she didn't feel like she could be honest with me. She didn't feel like she could be vulnerable with me or trust her heart with me, because every time she would, I would just stomp on it and just shut it down and flip it back on her. So we have a mentor that's involved in both of our lives, and they were picking up on this and noticing this, and they suggested, man, there are so many breakdowns for you guys. There's so many communication breakdowns for you guys. You're not on the same page ever. What if you just try to sow what they called a weekly meeting into your relationship? Maybe some of you do this or have tried this before. But it's a time in the week that's not a date night. It's very specifically not a date night. It is a very practical, we're going to get together for an hour a week because, if you were to start a business or start an organization or a company and your leadership team never met, that would be crazy. So we want to meet together, and we talk about practical things like our schedule this upcoming week. We talk about our budget. We talk about some personal things on our list. And then the second half of the conversation, we asked the question that our mentor gave us, and they said, ask the question, what was it like on the other side of me this week? And the one rule is you're not allowed to defend what comes out of the mouth of the person on the other side of you. And that was really, really difficult for me. Because as we started to sow this, and we started to get more on the same page, and we started to fight a little less, and it was great, I also became aware of areas I didn't even know I was sowing destructive things into our relationship. That led us to taking another step, wanting to get on the other side of somebody that could guide us through some of those things. So we've both been in counseling together and individually about the last 5 years now. And as a result of that kind of habit to say, gosh, I know it's expensive, and gosh, I know it takes time, and I know it's uncomfortable, but we're going to sow that in so that I can become more and more aware of all these things I'm sowing in here. There has been some incredible gifts and some incredible moments in that time together. I think about our areas where we would clash consistently. We still have plenty of those. But, I think about one of the big ones for us is finances. And statistically speaking, that would be some of you as well. But for us, we would clash on finances all the time. And I swear, I thought Apple products for me and Target for her was going to be the end of our relationship if we didn't figure something out, And it was weirdly defensive. It was weirdly emotional. Like neither of us could ask a question or kind of talk about our plan or talk to the other, any of this without just this high emotion and this high defense. And we're like, what is that? 9 times out of 10, we clash when the subject comes up. And on the other side of a counselor, one of the things, it's just one practical example, one of the things that we discovered is that we were speaking two completely different languages. We weren't even having the same conversation. It was impossible for us to hear one another because what was coming out in each of these conflicts and each of these bumps was, 10-year-old Emily and 10-year-old Jordan was coming to the table. And 10-year-old Emily and 10-year-old Jordan had some deep-rooted insecurities that we would bring to the table and that we would want to defend anytime there was some conflict. And what we realized is even though we grew up in the same areas, we had pretty different childhood experiences. For Emily, her mom passed away from cancer when she was 10 years old. And then she more or less raised herself through middle school and high school as her dad was in and out of employment dealing with that loss. They never had any money. They were in incredible debt. And then her dad had a long, long battle with alcohol. And so she was truly just independent and on her own dealing with that loss throughout middle school and high school. And she learned what the voice she heard or the lesson she learned was it's not going to work out. Like whenever somebody's like, hey, it's going to be fine, it's going to work out, she's like, no, it's not. I prayed for 9 months that my mom would get better. She didn't get better. I prayed for years and years that my dad would get it together, and he never got it together. It's not going to work out. I'm not safe. Life is unstable. For me, I grew up in a middle-class family. My dad always had a great job. It always worked out for me. I didn't have a lot of life experience. I hadn't dealt with a lot of big issues yet. And for me, I'm big and bold and confident, and let's go crazy, and let's pray big. We got a big God. It's going to be fine. It's going to work out. She's like, no, it's not. I'm like, why wouldn't it? Growing up, my dad was my coach for everything, all the way up to about high school. He was the coach for all the sports I played, and one of the ways that I felt like I got approval or validation from him, or I feel like he would be proud of me was, when I was like the guy on the team, my performance in sports, or, my performance in school. It was so tied up in that, and I really cared how people perceived me and how people saw me. And so when Emily and I bump, and this could be applied to so many areas for us, but just pick finances, for example. When we would come into conflict on this, we were asking two entirely different questions. Emily, every time this would come up, she was asking the question, am I safe? Are we okay? Am I going to go back to what my whole childhood has been and the roller coaster and the unpredictability and the emotional instability? Like, is that where we're headed? Are we going to be all right? I was asking the question, are you proud of me? Because my image has been so important. I feel like, my performance is how people have recognized me. And so I'm like, are you proud of me as a man, as your husband, as a leader? Do you trust me with our finances? We were asking two completely different questions. And that took, honestly, several years for us. Maybe we should have figured it out quicker, but it took years of these weekly meetings, years of counseling. And the moment where we discovered that felt like one of these kinds of moments. It felt like it took so much of the emotion out of those conflicts to where I could hear and comfort and not get defensive because she wasn't attacking me or my manhood or what kind of husband, and she could listen to me on the same exact side and know that I wasn't challenging her or controlling her or any of those things. It was one of those kind of gift type moments. That's just an example for us. But for you, what would it look like? What would it look like to have or to continue some of those intentional type habits? I think an interesting question as well, and this will be the last one of kind of the opportunities, is what are you sowing into your kids' perception of relationships? If you're married, there's probably no greater gift you can give to your children than how you love one another. If you're a single parent, then they are watching the way that you interact with your friendships, with your dating relationships, and what an incredible gift that you can give them when you sow the things that we know we should be sowing. So for you, does what you are sowing for match what you are hoping for? We all have an ideal future, what we want 10 years from now to look like, and it probably looks different than what we thought it would look like when we were a kid. But we're still hoping for something. And if I could be a fly in the wall, or if somebody could be a fly in the wall in your relationship, would they say, don't give up, you're sowing some great things, you're gonna reap what it is that you're hoping for, just stick with it? Or would they say, gosh, just to be honest with you, you're planting potatoes. And you're hoping for flowers. And you've got to start sowing and preparing something different if you want anything to be different. What do you need to sow today to reap what you dream of tomorrow? Whatever it is that you dream of, and maybe you're single, and maybe you need to take that 3 months, 6 months, 1 year to sow the correct things for you. Or maybe you need to keep sowing what it is that you're sowing and stick with it. Maybe you're in a dating relationship and you need to have some self-evaluative conversations about your part of the relationship or the direction that you're heading. Or you're realizing, gosh, they keep leading to destruction, and I'm kind of hoping a promise is going to fix that, and I need to have a reality check and do something different. Maybe you're married and you're like, you know what, we need that weekly meeting time to communicate differently. We need to schedule a regular date night back on the schedule. We need to allow a couple into our relationship that can speak into our relationship and knows what's really going on, or to be on the other side of somebody with experience. We need to sow those things. I don't know what it's going to be for you, and I think it's different for all of us. But I think we all are hoping for something. Hope is not a strategy, but the right strategy can provide hope. And I hope that you feel throughout this series, you know that we are for wherever you are at in your relationships. I believe strongly that you have a heavenly Father that is for your healthy relationships. And I can't wait to see what he does over the course of this series together.